Welcome to Proof of PR, your passport to the world of public relations for Bitcoin and Web3. I'm your host, Kelley Weaver, CEO of Melrose PR, the leading provider of communications and PR strategy in our unique industry. Get ready for an inside look into the future of finance, technology, and entrepreneurship from those driving innovation in the space. Join us as we learn how they generate headlines, cut through the noise, and grow their brand awareness through media placements, press mentions, and thought leadership. These are the stories behind their success. This is Proof of PR. Today, I am joined by Josh Hubberman, co-founder of award-winning digital design and experience studio, Cathedral, which works at the intersection of culture, commerce, and community. Cathedral has built brands for some of the most revered Web3 projects like Sound XYZ and Ledger Market. Welcome, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me. Excited to chat.
Such a pleasure. Josh and I, for context, have known each other personally for over a decade, and our professional lives have intersected at a few touch points. But he and I have saved this catch up for you. So we're doing this in real time because I'm so excited that he's joined the Web3 ecosystem and is building brands for, some of the top names in this space. So I'll be learning with you all about what Josh has been up to for the past few years, and I'm so excited. So Josh, can you tell everyone a little bit more about your background?
Yeah, man. I guess I would sum up my background as always being sort of interested in the intersection of culture spaces, brand, design, and technology. Yeah, my dad was a software engineer at Cornell, and my mom was a nonprofit founder of early childhood literacy. So I sort of had both this like very technical understanding growing up and a creative understanding, and that led me down a lot of different spaces. But started in playing in bands, and that led me to pitching a major California retailer called PacSun. I'm doing a music tour, and that led to me being asked to start a whole music and entertainment department there. So I sort of cut my teeth in the corporate world, doing 950 stores of brand extension through music. And so that meant a lot of different things, from music tours to building digital platforms around music as a brand extension. And sort of from there, got interested in leaving corporate America to start my own creative agencies. And so, yeah, just kind of spun backwards from there. But I've done everything from, building experiential tech platforms, working with Fortune 100 brands to what I'm doing now with Cathedral, doing sort of digital design experience. So, yeah, a lot of varied stuff, but always playing in those same sort of intersections of interest, which I feel lucky and thankful that I've been able to hang there.
That's awesome. And you've worked with some very mainstream consumer-facing brands over the years, doing some big activations, I know. What was the origin story for Cathedral? Yeah,
honestly, it's so funny because I feel like in life, you just keep finding avenues. You look at the things you love doing, you look at the problems you're facing, and so I just come out of really like early in my career, ended up not loving the agency model. Just felt like you can never sort of scale selling time, which is sort of a truth that led to Cathedral, ironically. But I took that learning and pivoted to like a SaaS company and chased a massive exit, for 8 years, and really grinding myself in entrepreneurs. Doing some really cool stuff, working with, the Nikes, the Microsofts, those sort of companies, but really felt sort of like, I had lost sight of a lot of my passions. It was really chasing a business model than chasing things that I just loved. And so I wanted to get back to feeling like I was spending my time and effort, as now a father of 3 young kids, and trying to figure out what it meant to also build businesses with kids. Led me down this road of trying to align more the things that I love with value. And so at the time we moved from California back to Ithaca, New York, and because of my wife, you can't work from home at the time, and also needing to get into a creative space, I ended up meeting who is now my business partner in Cathedral, John Robson. And it was very interesting. I just come from 14 years in LA. He had also spent 8 years in LA, or 9 years early on. And, he was a design-focused software engineer who was a unicorn of a human who happened to also have had a publishing deal and been a songwriter producer, and also had 3 young kids. And it was just one of those things over 6 months, talking about the internet being this like boring place that deep narratives and immersive experiences just weren't happening on social media, and talking about a lot of the problems we felt at sort of the bridge between design and technology. led to us just sort of saying, why don't we go out and just start building stuff? And so that was the genesis of what ended up becoming Cathedral, was just us working in the same space for 6 months plus together.
What types of projects did you start working on with him at Cathedral? And then, what was sort of the first Web3 experience that you had?
Yeah, it's interesting, because when you start a creative studio, and the seeds for us were like, we're not going to sell time, like agencies, especially if you're doing highly creative work that's, design and tech, like the detriment to that is like quick turn projects where you don't get to be thoughtful, where you're just trying to scale people. And so we just were like, how do we show the world this way we're thinking about? At the time, we were calling them engineered experiences, but how do we bring community into immersive digital spaces that is not social media, that's also not your boring sort of website, to help elevate narratives around campaigns, music, and other stuff? And, music was a great starting point, because at the time I was managing an artist that was signed to Atlantic Records. And, we felt like much of the major label ecosystem was templated in its approach to marketing. I mean, just, you pay some TikTok promotional money, you might, put some content on social media, and that's sort of it. And there was a song that when we left the major label ecosystem to release independently, we thought had a lot of value, but also had a lot of narrative. It was a song called Happy Face. And it was a song that was in many ways just about like the fact that like we all are curating our digital selves, and yet like we don't know if we're even happy doing so, but we're all putting a smile while we're on the internet. And so we thought that the better way to release that song than put it on Spotify or other streaming platforms was to make a website where you had to control the branding through facial recognition and a smile. And so we launched this experiment where we did like a multi-week lead up promotional campaign on this site that just had this really opaque wording of like, death of my generation, call this phone number, are you content or content? And we had all these fans leaving voicemails on this phone number just about whether they were content in their online worlds. And then we vocoded them and we put them back out as content. We led this whole sort of spiral down. And when the site launched, it was basically you were controlling this smile face branding. And when you figured out that smiling turned on the song, you had to hold a smile. So the only way you could listen to the song was by literally smiling at your computer. And if you lost your smile, then the website would melt on you. But if you could hold your smile for the whole song, then you unlocked a limited edition merch capsule, right? And so it had this whole social media component that said, like, I was happy for 3 minutes and 20 seconds, or however long you held your smile, right? We were recording the whole thing. And it was just one of those things where we felt like that sort of explained all of our thesis around, how we felt design and technology could come together to immerse consumers in this new medium of the internet. And we were lucky enough to win some awards for the campaign. We got a lot of visibility, and that led to a slew of inbound. And the second part of your question, I know this is long-winded now, as I realize I'm just blabbering, but we were interested in blockchain technology. And it's funny, thinking about, because you, Kelley, I mean, this must have been a few years prior, right? Like I remember going to that one blockchain dinner and, just thinking about the folks that were there and my lack of understanding about the technology then, to parsing it through with my business partner at the time. But early Cathedral, we were like, where is the culture? Where is this going with Ethereum, where there's this layer of things that are going to be built around this technology, and how does that solve problems in the spaces we're interested in? And we had started concepting some things, but that Happy Face campaign led to Alex Zhang, who became at the time the mayor of Friends with Benefits, reaching out to us. And at the time, FWB was this like very early community that had all the signals we loved. Trevor McFettery's coming from the music space, doing what he was doing with Lil Miquela and like virtual influencers, and like Eric Hugh was like, this amazing visual designer. Like all these people that we just loved and respected were in this early community. And we got asked to come in and sort of rethink the brand, but also design and build what would become this community-owned NFT art auction gallery. And it was really cool, because we were just like, yeah, pay us in FWB tokens. Like, hell yeah, let's jump in. And like this idea that through our efforts, we could create value within this community ecosystem, and that value would come back to us because of our efforts, was this very new and novel concept that I think got us highly intrigued about, where Web3 technologies, culture, and design would sort of intersect. And then we just sort of fell down the wormhole.
Love that. You have this sort of extensive background with music. And when I was first discovering kind of the potential impact of blockchain, I remember music seemed like an obvious use case for a number of reasons, but I don't even have a background working in that industry. So, I'm curious sort of where that took you and how, where we're at with that right now. And then where, what's the potential?
I feel like music is almost this like, the signal for all of blockchain, which is just like when you get underneath it, you realize how many potential areas of impact there are with the technology, right? And music is like this utterly complex business model that is, that has existed for so long. And so, man, there's so many areas of music that have potential to be impacted, right? And you think about like, purely just on a royalties and payment side, the sort of like immediate transparent ability to generate payments is like is a promise, right? Artists wait months and months and quarters to get all of the accounting and to finally get paid for streams that happen, so long ago. So like there's this whole vertical of just that side, right? Contracts, obviously, like the legal side, the implications potentially of those things. I think there was a ton of interest. We were lucky enough to meet David Greenstein early in sound, and Catalog had been around doing these one-of-one drops and really thinking about how music as a fine art, could look. And we worked with David to build the visual identity for Sound XYZ, and just the idea of how do we widen the net here, have lower cost and more fans be able to participate in music drops. And so, Sound was really experimenting around the idea of music as a fine art and collectible, and obviously had a huge blow up there. And there's really interesting pieces there. So there's that whole side of it, and then I think for us at Cathedral, some of the more intriguing things we see in music is just, and in many ways, this ties back to our early lessons in Friends with Benefits, is just community incentives, right? If you think about any music artist, the way that the artist and participates with the fan community and the symbiosis that can occur is something we see all across different sides of music. So you think of like, K-pop fandom, some of them are more organized than record labels, right? They're like, they're able to organize and market sometimes better than organizations, and yet they have no incentive to do so other than the love of that artist, right? Well, what would happen if you flip those incentives up? What would happen if you knew that Drake's first fan ever had collected, X token, and you could track that from day one and start delivering back value to fans who have participated in an ecosystem over time, right? And so we started playing with a lot of that. Again, with Jaguar Twin, we built a whole campaign around participation in drops, where we created a proof of fandom NFT that would track all of the things you did across the ecosystem inside of our tech, but then because of blockchain, also outside of it, right? So you collect it on Sound, or you collect it on Catalog, or anywhere else, and your crown would sort of both visually represent all of this nuance of your participation in the fan community, but also in the metadata, we could track those things. And then that could serve as this master key to unlock rooms in some of the online spaces we were developing, and, merchandise discounts or early access to ticketing, right? So I think there's this whole sort of massive unlock as it comes to sort of fan and artist incentives. That's really interesting.
Obviously, you have the Jaguar Twin audience. They're super fans. They may or may not be familiar with interacting with Ethereum. And then you also have the sort of folks that are crypto native that do have that experience. Did they discover the music? Like, what was the audience made up of, I guess, is my question.
I think that's a great question, right? Because we're in such an interesting time. But, Cathedral's perspective, I think we've always been frustrated by, early on it was like, you're a Web3 musician. And it's like, well, you're a musician, right? Like our perspective around the tech is that the tech's just a new paintbrush, there are a ton of protocols under the internet. We don't have any understanding of what they are because our web products just do what they need to do, right? You're not like checking your email, talking about the protocols underneath, right? And so it was always interesting to us, this, you either needed to be that artist or this artist. And we talk about Web 2 fans, Web 3 fans. Well, obviously for us, as the space matures, there will be none of that, right? You're a music fan. And if the artist you love leverages certain tech that enables these things, you won't care what we call it, and I think that's the future we're trying to get to. That said, right, like it just wasn't that way, especially when we were early building Jaguar Twin. And so we had to be really conscious about the use case, because I think crypto native consumers, right, we're looking for a different experience, and that experience, just based on infrastructure, could be considered clunky to Web2 fans who've not participated in the current space. And so there's a huge amount of onboarding narrative that needed to happen to try to get them on. So for us, we chose to really move towards, if we're going to drive experiments that are meant to sort of showcase what the tech can do, we should try to be as native as we can to make sure that it like really plays into sort of Web3 mechanics. So we tried to do as good of a job as we could about onboarding. The interesting thing that we found, and there was obviously at that point even more of a prevalent narrative just around climate and other things that were issues to fans. They were very just sort of, everything was about the PFP project. So all the like top line things were fancy JPEG selling for stupid money and everything being like a rug and being bad for climate. And so we had to battle against that. And the way we chose to do that with fans was just like, we would just say, here's how we believe, do your own research, obviously, right? Secondarily, you don't have to participate. And third, we thought the best thing to do was just give actual value that fans would love. So instead of just like trying to sell NFTs to them, which wasn't the purpose, as I said before, it's really about participation and incentives. We created this chase called the artifact hunt. So we had sort of 3 custom smart contracts we built. One was the crown and that whole thing. One was music. So you could purchase editions of music. But the third were what we called artifacts. And it was all one-of-one media NFTs, but each of them were a really like personal and important part to Roy's story as a musician throughout his career, right? But you had to discover them. And the way you could discover them was by passing these codes through. It was part of the narrative, but to this AI that was controlling this build we built. And so fans would go in and like we'd drop hints around the campaign, and the ones that were paying attention could go and discover a one-of-one and then collect it for free. And so what we found was that fans who could care less about buying a music NFT or any of these other things, who loved the project, wanted to spend that time anyway because they wanted to show that they understood the project. And so all of a sudden we had fans that were discovering 50 NFTs. We had like full, community message boards where people were keeping track of the codes and the hints in like full spreadsheets, trying to like solve these problems. And what would happen is once a one-of-one was collected, these fans would be like, oh my God, I own this digital artifact. Like it was I think everybody who's been in Web3 ecosystems knows that first feeling of like realizing you own this digital object. And it's just a thing you didn't realize until you did. And all of a sudden you're like, oh, this is mine. And I think we just saw a lot of that, right? And so our lesson was, throughout all the hurdles, the thing that we try to do most is just build use cases where a kid would be like, this is just cool because it's cool. Not because they have to understand the underlying tech, but because it actually solves a problem and changes the narrative. So we're always looking for that bridge where Web3 technologies solve a true consumer problem, and we try to build the bridge.
It's so fascinating to hear you talk about this, because you really understand how consumers think and how they want to experience things, like through your decades of experience with marketing to consumers. My background is more like PR and Web3 is much more B2B, or like developer facing even. So we haven't really even, we dabbled with some stuff that's more consumer facing, like the fold card and things like that. But it's really interesting. It's fun to hear you talk about this, because it is this kind of, I feel like it has to be the next wave, the next push is to sort of bridge this friendliness for consumers if we want retail and consumers to get involved and to start interacting with it, and for it to be like powering these tools under the hood and them not even realize it.
Totally. That's sort of been, it's funny because it's been our entire thesis from day one. And of course, infrastructure has to do its thing. And you have these cycles of enough infrastructure means consumer use cases, which will drive the need for more infrastructure. And right, it continues to move that way. We've been pretty thick, I don't know what's the right, thick-skulled maybe, but I feel like we tend to just move on and say no to projects that come across our building that don't feel like they're doing that. Like we just have never been fans of forcing use cases or primitives that don't necessarily feel like there is a use case, And so, really trying to be delicate about finding those things that we feel are exciting. And of course, that's where a lot of, I think, good work comes from, is really understanding it yourself, being able to understand the why, and then be passionate about trying to make it. I think that's this next phase, right? It feels like that's the energy right now this sort of bear broader market is that there's still a ton of really creative builders who really understand the tech and are now working on building some of those next products.
Tell me about what you guys did with Ledger Market. Really curious about that. I mean, speaking of infrastructure, the hardware wallets are kind of a cornerstone for people being able to interact with the tech. So I'm curious about your work there.
I mean, Ledger, obviously behemoth, right? In terms of security, and their consumer products are huge in terms of both adoption, but also, keeping your crypto secure, which is massive, right? And that's always been sort of the hallmark there. And, Ian Rogers, who has a pretty storied career and background over at Ledger, came from, Beats Music, Beastie Boys, like just understands LVMH, I think, as well. He really sort of understands the intersection of technology and consumer. And I think, at the time for them, you think of, hardware device, and then you start to think of enterprise on the other side of security, right? And in the middle of that, if you can own a platform that comes from, hardware consumer adoption to a place to then leverage that hardware, right? That then gives enterprise a place to deploy and drop products. You sort of have an Apple-like ecosystem. I mean, you think of like what iTunes meant for the iPod, right? Like, it's like you needed iTunes in the middle there to like have the whole ecosystem make sense. And I think much of that was the seed of Ledger Market. And we were lucky enough that they trusted us to come in and really think through visual identity and UI UX design around the whole marketplace. And it was a really fun one for us, because I think, when you think of Ledger, you think security, maybe sort of culture consumer might not be the first word. So like trying to think of how to make security and encryption a sort of a sexy, usable thing where it's not just screamed in your face, right? It was a fun challenge for us. And the way we chose to do that was we ended up building this whole generative typeface, this type system that had 3 billion font combinations, and we were able to build tooling around it. And so the way that the type system is used across the Ledger Market ecosystem is that anytime a new block happens on Ethereum, the website font fully regenerates itself. So the word market is never the same forever on the website. And it's this like heartbeat of the Ethereum chain that is like felt, not spoken. It's not screamed at your face, right? It's just this like, you feel the secure nature underneath it, and you sort of experience it that way. But it was fun to build that into a whole visual identity because, through the Ledger Market, they did like a Genesis pass, and there were 10,000 passes, and the word market on each of the 10,000 passes was just slightly different, fully generated through this tooling. And I guess that's kind of I think when we think about what Cathedral does, we've been talking a lot about this notion of functional branding. And I think Web3 tech has really sort of moved us forward in some ways to this because it's so community driven first. But this idea that, that branding in sort of this modern era is really community participation within it, that you not only desire, but you really need communities to adopt your visual identity, to participate with it, to play with it, to share it, to sort of embody and take on that branding, because it really is a two-way narrative. There is the one-way street of being marketed at anymore.
How does storytelling play a role in your process? I know you're sort of, what aspects are you controlling when you engage with a team? So,
it really depends on needs, but our favorite, we on purpose, we're a small team. I think we're all highly entrepreneurial. We all come from various different agency roles, and we understand how we work in our process really well. So we love biting off big chunks. Like our happiest space is a partner that delivers a very, very, very strong why and an understanding of what this thing has to do. And if we're set up with that as like a kickoff, we know how to run our process around it. We definitely have run narrative sprints, and we do narrative a lot. Not always, though. I think sometimes, brands already have a strong built-in narrative, but for us, like, a lot of times it's thinking through naming, full visual identity. So all the visual aesthetics of the whole brand and design system, and then all of the UI UX design of whatever digital product, whether that's website, e-commerce, marketplaces, whatever, and then also software development down to Solidity. We do in-house these days. So we're really like a plug-in early stage partner in many ways. Like our favorite sprints are like 0 to 1, where it's like idea stage still loose, but like a really strong why, and we can sort of bring it to market.
Have you built apps too?
We do a lot more web space, we do a lot more web space, not necessarily native apps. Although we could, I think most of our work ends up being web-based.
What are some of the differences between, some of your experiences working with, more traditional Web 2 companies and then, Web 3 native companies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think, I think reasons for existing, right, is I guess the first one I'd think of, right? I think so many companies that have existed for so long have an understanding of sort of just incrementally moving a dial on whatever, right? There's like levers you're trying to pull year over year. There's a lot of historicals to be looking at. And so it's a lot of times campaign work that is meant to do one specific thing, less maybe experimentation. Web3 native brands, I think, come from like a futurist perspective, sometimes maybe an overly utopian perspective about things. And there's often a desire to really push boundaries. And I think that has married well with just our instincts. Like I think we're sort of known for having maybe an avant-garde design perspective, but really rooted in this like systems approach. So it's like, it feels very aesthetically pushing, but is also often usable. And that's really worked well with a lot of Web3 companies that are trying to build.
What about those more traditional brands or like artists or things like Jaguar Twin what's their why in terms of integrating Web3 tooling?
Yeah, I think frankly, a lot of brands are trying to figure that out. And the thing that's been interesting with us on the major brand side, and honestly, we've shied away from a lot of it. I think Cooper Turley, I think it was like early FWB. I was just trying to it was maybe one of the first music sort of Web3 folks I had met. So I was just like, tell me everything. I want to know everything. This is like day one of the space. And I thought his response is really stuck with me, right? Which is like, I can't like give you the secrets because it's such a nascent space. There's so much innovation happening. So he's like, my best advice to you is like dig in and see what everybody else is already doing, and then run that all through your filters and try to find the plus one to it. Like find the next thing that moves it a little forward, because it's constantly shifting, right? And that's really stuck with me because that's definitely the truth. So when brands come into the space, I think they tend to say like, tell me what we should do. And the answer to what you should do is like, you have to fully know your own brand. You have to know your goals. You have to understand the tech enough to know why you'd want to participate. You have to be thinking long-term and not just trying to buy onto a trend, right? And because of that, we've tended to shy away from that, like the onboarding a massive brand into like Web3 primitives is very time consuming, and we like to get our hands dirty. So that tends to actually be our first like, oh, you don't actually have a thought or a strategy yet. We tend to just move on.
It resonates with me so much.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's one of the things that you've done good. It really well is like being choosy about who you'll align yourself with values wise, and making sure that there's alignment there, because this industry tends to attract an interesting crowd. And some of those are like innovators and forward thinkers, and some of those are just kind of opportunists. And it's,
totally.
It's become easier to navigate, but it can be tricky.
Yeah. I mean, for sure. And I think it's always difficult, right? Because if you're a brand, brands have like this voice out in the world, and yet they're made up of just individual people like you and me who are trying to uphold those brand values. So there's actually an extra layer of like, is this the right thing for the brand? Obviously brands who do it well, their brand is felt. And I think that's a tough space. When you're entering this new technology, you might not fully grasp it. You're trying to figure out how that ties back to your brand. And then you see what others are doing, and the natural urge is to sort of do what's being done. It's like, oh, so-and-so did this type of drop, so I'm going to do a similar, it's like, or whatever the thing is, as opposed to what the space really needs more of is a brand being like, this is what makes us special. This is our heritage. These are the things we do. This is how our consumers, Web 2, participate with our brand. How do we move the needle by creating something in this space that ties back to that thing? Because that's where innovation will come from. It comes from brands actually knowing how they exist and being bullish enough to enter the space purposefully from their own perspective. We don't need a lot of just copycat stuff. We need people experimenting and like really trying to push truthfully. And I think when that happens, you find, crypto native consumers who are in the space, cheering on those brands because they want more of that, right? Whereas, it's obvious when brands sort of come in and just attempt to participate and buy in.
You talked about this a little bit already, but I'm curious what some of the hurdles have been for the non-crypto native fan groups and, consumer groups that you've interacted with through some of this work, and what needs to happen in order to get us there where it's less clunky for, folks who haven't interacted with the tech before to maybe interact with that without even knowing eventually.
Passphrases, things like that. There's just so much of getting a first wallet and figuring out how to buy crypto is still the biggest hurdle, right? And I think, obviously there's a ton that's constantly being worked in that space because of that, right? And it's, to the point where there's infrastructure underneath, of course, now, or like a so rare on MLB, right? Like you've got an Ethereum wallet under the hood by, an email address, and, you can do what you want with that or take it, right? And it's like, but the way to get there and to onboard to it is so quick and easy. And of course there's, fiat gateways to buy Ethereum with a credit card. And so it's like the hurdles are getting lower and lower in terms of participating. And I think that's still the biggest thing. I think once you get past that, a lot of the UX is getting easier and easier, to use. And a lot of the L2 stuff is making it really easy to sort of move across. Optimism stuff, what Coinbase just launched with Base and Zora Network. There's a lot of interesting thing happening with L2s that are making it easier and easier to move around.
And less expensive for the brands, I suppose, and consumers.
Which was definitely a thing. We've seen it with some of the stuff we've launched, both on the Jaguar Twin side, with fans being like, oh my God, like they're doing the calculations. They're not like native in ETH. So they're like, wait, this free collectible is actually, $30 or whatever. It's like, that's a lot. It's a lot of money, right? Even just gas. So those things become huge. We launched a game called Look Again, and we launched on mainnet, right? And we're working on a V2 optimization and moving into an L2 and some other stuff. But like that was a big hurdle, right, with the game, is because the collection of the open editions is really a social signal. It's really a way to potentially win this bag of ETH. But like just in and of itself, daily, mainnet gas makes it difficult to want to participate every day. So yeah, all very real stuff.
Do you ever interact with PR firms in your current role, like with these activations once they're built, or is that more like the brands who hire you then engage those types of functions?
Yeah, a lot of times it's with the partner, right? It's the partners are the ones that are hiring PR. We've definitely done some stuff internally. And I think, it's interesting because, thinking about you've been in this game so long in this space, which is crazy, right? And I'm curious how you've seen the emerging sort of space verticalized, because there are so many pockets of it, right? To sort of generate earned media. And I feel like it must be difficult. My perspective on PR, which I guess I would just say is earned media, right? In the space is just where, like you're used to traditional media, it's all these various outlets, you sort of know where to go. Whereas like the emergence of like earned media in this space is so different. It's not necessarily traditional media outlets, although that may make sense for certain projects, right? It's like, it feels like it's such a goal-based thing. And then trying to find a publicist who has relationships and an understanding for you specifically and what you need to generate the ideal outcomes for your business is like not a one-to-one. It's actually like very complicated, I feel like.
It makes it fun and interesting, and it makes us useful because even under the crypto umbrella, there's so many different categories now. And so like to the outside world, crypto seems like a super niche thing, but then in our industry, it's actually like, no, you need to understand all the differences, the different types of reporters under that gigantic umbrella. And then also where your users are, like what your goals are. So if your goal is to raise more money, then it's probably more mainstream, or it depends on the types of money that you're trying to raise too, institutional, so depending on what the goals are. One thing that we shied away from right away in the beginning was like helping any artists with their specific NFT drops and marketing that, because I think there was just it was tough to break through the noise with reporters because they just kind of rolled their eyes at it. It felt like ICO days all over again. It was just tricky. But yeah, you're right. Like even in our world, there's so many different subcategories. And so you have to kind of
Do
figure
you
out
feel like that's, has it burnt media out? Like do the prevailing narratives, I mean, obviously like this is part of where broader consumers find the narrative, right? I mean, it's social media, it's earned media, it's also press. It's like, it felt like it got to this point where it was tough to get coverage for a project if it used the term NFT. It's like, oh my gosh, it's an NFT project, or, I'm curious your thoughts, being deep inside it. Do you see in the bear, is it like, is there more interest in innovation stories, or like I'm curious what the broader context of how people are looking at it from that perspective is.
Yeah. I mean, I think the media, just like any of us, get kind of worn out on different things. But there is one thing that's happened in this market is that reporters rely on relationships and trust more than ever. I mean, I guess that's probably in any industry, but we find there's less noise to cut through. So we can really leverage relationships. And, I think any innovation or signals are interesting right now because everyone wants to know sort of what's happening and when this is going to change and what's, so stories are breaking through right now, which is nice. And if you're talking about like fundraise stories, the threshold's a lot lower than it was, obviously, for like the number that's going to break through because there's less of it happening. So I do think that there's definitely sort of unique opportunities in the different market conditions. When everybody's, yelling and screaming and euphoric, it's hard to cut through all that noise. And there's so many people hopping on the bandwagon. And so I don't know. We'll see. We've been through a few market cycles here, so we're kind of familiar with these expansions and contractions, but it has been super interesting.
I think it's part of, I remember that being just John and I had very, sort of direct conversations about expectations from moving into the space, right? And just being aware that there still are market cycles. It's early, like, it's tough for the tech not to outpace expectations with the tech. And so that, of course, that creates a bubble over time, right? So you sort of were like, do we believe in the tech? Are we here long term? And if you are, then let's find ways to keep building. I
mean, it's been almost 7 years, or about 7 years, since I first got excited about the technology. And I thought, within a couple of years at most, we would have, all of my expectations met about the potentials unlocked. And like, here we are, and we're still talking about it. So it's, I wasn't familiar with that in terms of like how long this actually takes.
Yeah, you are.
So much happens in these cycles.
It is interesting though. I mean, we're sort of in this space of, we're really more venture studio like in many ways, like a lot of our best work, what we love to do is idea stage, where we participate, part cash, part upside economics, right? And it's interesting because a lot of that then depends on venture money, like in terms of pipeline, how many people are building new ideas? A lot of that volume comes from our investors investing into the space, and so all these, you realize these sort of macro, micro interplays in a time like this, I mean, in bull run spaces, I mean, there were times when inbound pipeline at Cathedral was like my biggest frustration in the world, where I was just like, I'm on the phone, like I can't get off the phone. Like every day is like fielding 10 calls and trying to like, figure out who's real, who's making cool stuff, like who would we participate with, and obviously less investment capital means the influx of that is just not as the same size, There's just as much cool stuff being built. It's just about volume, it's like, it's just interesting to see all those things move.
And figuring out who's real and what's, Was it your partner? Tell me a little bit more about the dynamic between the two of you and who first got excited about this, Web3 vertical for you guys? Yeah.
I mean, three partners at Cathedral. John and I co-founded. Dan, our creative director, is a third partner, Dan Farrow. John runs technology here. So, his whole background is software development, and he's been therefore interested in technology, I think, for a lot longer in terms of pure blockchain. So he was definitely, I would say, the source of a lot of the intrigue. And for me, I'm always like systems thinker. I love like applying these things to real world, products, goals, brands, whatever. And so we definitely got intrigued with him. And I think in many ways, Dan's really been a third. And his perspective on the world is helpful, that he's not necessarily as bit off into the realm. He definitely toes the line, I think, which is hugely helpful. I feel like, we like very much, we firmly believe in the way we process information collectively being the strength of our small studio. And so it's like having different perspectives on everything from tech to use cases to like what's good versus what's bad or what's like harmful to the world is actually a really good thing, man, because it forces you to, when you have such respect for your partners and their life experience, you tend to come to the better solution once everybody around the table sees it, rather than just somebody bullishly pushing through everybody else. And I think much of that is reflected in the work. It's probably why a lot of the decisions that we make tend to feel in this like interesting space of, it's because everybody's perspective is deeply represented.
That dynamic, I'm sure, is so helpful in all areas, because you have so many different kind of perspectives and people learning and people way ahead teaching and all of that. So that, yeah.
Well, no, we think a lot about creative work and just, where does that come from? How does it thrive best? And I don't know, that's like the stuff we obsess over here. And I think that's, some of when you have folks around the table that you really do implicitly trust their own internal anchor, like, that they spend a lot of time in their life trying to understand the world around them. And when you can trust their anchor, then you can sort of collectively trust each other, and then it becomes this different collaboration when you get over that hurdle, right? Because you sit in a room with somebody who you don't trust their own internal trust of themselves. It's tough to like build stuff together, because you tend to lean more on how you feel, because you trust yourself, but a different thing happens when you know everybody there has come to this from a lot of work and effort and like thriving in their space. It's a whole different respect and collaboration that builds some fun stuff. At least at the end of the day, we love the stuff we build. So that's like, that's the whole thing for us. We just want to like love the work we put out and feel proud of it, And
it's so important to love working with the people that you do, I think. That's one of the things that I've kind of realized later and later is, the people that I interact most with day to day, it dictates everything. And if you have a good workflow and a good collaboration and respect for one another, it makes everything so much easier and effortless.
Huge. Oh, life makes life so much better.
Life. Yeah. Life. Exactly. Because it bleeds into everything that you do.
It does.
You mentioned this kind of, inbound during, bullish times. Is that when you found that, I'm curious, the appetite for big consumer facing brands coming into Web3? We've talked about that a little at a few touch points in this convo, but yeah. Is that appetite, does that ebb and flow with the market?
Sadly, yes. Which has always been like a good indicator for us, right? If anybody's close to saying yes to a really cool project, but then the price of Ethereum fluctuates and they're not sure they want to come in, it's like those things are big signals of whether or not they actually believe the tech is solving a real problem for their brand, or if they're trying to just come in because they think it's going to be beneficial on the PR side, right? In some way. So yeah, we tend to stay away, but sadly we do see a lot of that on the branded side. There's still some, I think brands that right now are interested probably are all here for the right reasons. If they're right now talking about wanting to build long-term, then they're here because they actually see a problem being solved. Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think at those points, there's just such volume that it's difficult to like parse through. It just really is. I mean, there's so many just spaces you can build in, and you're trying to look at the thing you do best and the things you're interested in. And so it's just this like tiered ranking system to get to what you are like, man, we want to build,
I'd love to hear what the next couple of years, what the goals are for Cathedral. And then any closing thoughts that you want to share. Love to hear those too.
Yeah. I mean, we look back 5 years from now, I think we want to have planted a garden of consumer projects that have really moved the space forward, both from an aesthetic, product, and usability perspective. We want to have some wide-reaching consumer projects that just have brought more people into leveraging the tech. And I hope at that point we're not even speaking to the tech. I hope we're just using it within projects. So that's really the big thing for us. We just want to keep loving the work we do and finding use cases that spark us and make us passionate. Yeah, I think that's really it. I mean, that's like the whole thing, for us. That's what drives us for sure.
Well, Josh, I really appreciate you coming on the show today. It's so fun to always talk to you. You are one of the most creative people I've ever met. Even hearing you talk about these activations, I'm just like, my mind is always blown with the ledger market and the regenerate. I mean, it's just, your ideas are amazing. So I'm super excited to keep up and watch how you innovate. I'll drop some links for the audience in terms of where they can check out Cathedral and some of the work.
Cool. I love how this intersecting path's been crazy. So, I mean, it's crazy to think you've been here for 7 years. That makes us noobs. You know what I mean? It's like, it's so crazy to think about your background and how long you've been here. It's crazy. So I've loved watching you continue to build, man. It's really inspiring. It always has been for us, very proud.
Thank you. Yes, I love our intersection. And, your wife and I worked in PR together in 2008, 2009.
It's crazy.
So,
I know.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Well, awesome, Josh. Thank you again.
Yep. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Proof of PR. This episode was brought to you by Melrose PR, the leading provider of communications and PR strategy for Bitcoin and Web3 innovators. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, rate, and review us wherever you listen today. To stay up to date on upcoming guests and news, visit proofofpr.com or follow us on Twitter @proofofpr. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and hodling.